Hello and welcome back again. So we have a lot of requests and a lot of questions that come in from people about things that they'd like us to talk about. So one of the most popular ones recently seems to people wanting to understand the mistakes they can make in buying a company, presumably not to make the mistakes themselves. But one person put it in such a beautiful way. So this episode is going to be called How to F Up Buying a Company. So Paul, let's get straight into it with your experience. What are the most common mistakes that people make at M&A?
Okay, yeah, great conversation. I think, look, we all make mistakes in life, in M&A, in business in general. And I guess the key thing really is to try and avoid making those mistakes in the first place. So maybe working with other people that have been there, done it, had those mistakes themselves, and can help you not make the same mistakes. And of course, you want to win more than you lose. So, what is the most common mistake or common mistakes that people make in M&A? Well, I think the first thing is rushing the process, not fully understanding the process, cutting corners, not fully understanding the target company that they want to buy, not doing enough due diligence, which can then lead to surprises post acquisition. And I think that really, patience and thoroughness are really quite key to avoiding those sort of costly errors and working with others that have more expertise and maybe made those mistakes previously, and can help you avoid making them yourself. So an example would be early on in the journey, we got involved in a construction business. We did due diligence, which was quite light touch, to be honest. And in the construction industry, it's quite common for there to be retention. So you'll get a job. Part of the contract will be that the customer will retain some of the money that they're going to pay you until you've basically completed the project, and any snags and whatever have been dealt with, and then they can release the final payment. And we were told in due diligence that most retentions get paid within 12 months, and we just accepted that in good faith. And actually, what we found out that most of those retentions don't come in, and those that do can take as much as 5 years to come in. So that can then have a detrimental impact on how your cash flow forecast was going to look, because you'd expected that level of money to come in 12 months, where the reality was it was going to take up to 5 years, and not much of it was actually going to come in. So there's an example of not doing enough thorough due diligence and understanding the process in this particular example of retentions, which can be quite costly.
Okay, interesting. So are there risks for overpaying for a business? And if there are, how do you actually avoid that becoming something? And why make it in the first place as well? Is it just an oversight? Heart too much in it? Like I bought a house recently and I know I definitely overpaid for it, but it's because I really wanted it and other people wanted it too.
Yeah, it's similar with acquisitions. I think it's dead easy to find a deal, and it's then dead easy to overpay for a business. And I guess, look, particularly if you're starting out and haven't done a deal and you just want to get that first deal over the line, you might think the only way to do this is to pay more money for it to make it happen. But the challenge with overpaying for a business is potentially you can then be in an over leveraged position. If you're in an over leveraged position, you then have to do short term decisions to be able to service the overpayment, if you like, and that can then drive a certain behavior within the business that isn't necessarily going to drive what's in the best long-term interest for that particular business and the growth journey that you want to go on. So it's easy to get into that situation, but it's far wiser, I think, to walk away from it. Pretty much every single deal, 99.9% of the time, when I talk to a business owner, it will always be the case that they'll want more than you're willing to pay, both as an overall valuation consideration and also maybe whatever your sort of down payment at the outset is going to be. They're always going to want any seller financing to be paid in a quicker timescale than you're suggesting. So you really need to become expert at how to deal with those sort of common objections as to why you're not going to overpay for the business, why you're only going to pay this amount up front, why the deferred has to be serviced over a certain period of time. And we have a process that we've developed that can educate a business owner, and we can demonstrate using spreadsheets and financial models to show what's affordable and what's not. So it's just important that if you can't get to a position where you can get into a deal that's going to be serviceable and viable, that you're better to walk away and park it in your pipeline and call the owner in a year's time and say, how are you getting on selling your business? And chances are, as 90% of businesses, SMEs don't sell, is they probably won't have sold it. And if they have, well, great, fine, but it's worth a follow-up call, and maybe they'll become more realistic. So time is key, really, and yeah, being able to walk away and persevere and just take time looking at a deal and figuring out what's affordable and what's not.
So I would imagine in the earlier part of the process, business owners can be incredibly charming and they only want to tell you all the wonderful things about their business and they won't want to tell you any of the negative things. I remember one of the first businesses that you bought, it was a property related business, so an estate agency, and the guy that owned it was 70 odd years of age, very charming. And I remember when we went to view the business, he wanted to show how wonderful the premises are and, you know, some of the staff, etc. And I don't know whether you recall this, but we went into one of the back offices. So with it being an estate agent, they used to hold keys to go and do viewings on properties. It was like, this is a wonderful key safe that we've developed, which was basically an old wooden cupboard, wasn't it? But he wanted to talk about the wood that it was made out, why it was so beautiful, how it cost him so much money to make, and how that must impact the valuation of his business for some reason. But there must be quite a few red flags that people miss during the due diligence process. You know, can you talk about some of those and what they might be?
Yeah, so I mean, I think from a sort of financial point of view, I say that that the financial statements tell you a lot about the business. So in due diligence, we're looking for any inconsistencies. Are margins the same, better, worse, consistent? Is there anything in the P&L that we've seen maybe increasing costs in certain areas? We're looking at the balance sheet. A really good one where most businesses probably have some sort of inconsistency is if they're a business that holds stock inventory. If you've got that inventory in different forms, it can be valued in different ways. So, for example, I was involved in the fresh produce business where we basically grow some fresh fruit and vegetables. So for a period of time, that stock would have some value as plants in the ground. We would then have, packaged up, ready to go, shipped out to customers stock, and obviously you would value that stock in different ways. But how do you value what a tomato plant is worth versus what you're selling it on to a customer at in a already packaged pallet? It's far easier to do that bit because you know what you're going to sell it to your customer for, and you know what your margin is and what your costs are. So it's fairly easy to value that, if you like, finished stock. But that work in progress can be quite subjective. So there's an example of something that we might look at. Looking at the sort of operational side in due diligence as well, have they got any outdated technology, poor management? Is the culture, is there any misalignment in the sort of cultural values of the company? And I guess, trying to go through that process with experts in the sort of financial, legal and operational side of things is really crucial to understanding the business and uncovering anything that potentially could be seen as a red flag. If you're interested in mergers and acquisitions, we have a free to join community of deal makers around the world where we share knowledge, expertise, deals, and joint ventures. I produce regular content there, and it's the first place that you can see it. So if you'd like to find out more about this and how we can joint venture together, I guess the vast majority of deals that we have done have been with joint venture partners. And I guess to get to 100 plus deals, there's only so many hours in the day. So by sharing the work with like-minded others, we can increase that bandwidth. So to learn more about this and to join our community, visit buybuildsellprogram.com.
So having sort of unrealistic growth expectations, I'd imagine that must impact a lot of deals. I think back to COVID, and there are still some companies now that they almost ended up having really bumper trading times. Everyone was caged and locked up for so long that the market sort of exploded in certain sectors. But projecting for the future when making a decision on buying that business, it must be something you have to be incredibly careful with.
Yeah, so again, it comes back to due diligence and understanding the market you're getting involved in. Having industry experts that have maybe been through the sort of financial cycle of recessions, boom and bust times, etc. Because obviously they'll be able to navigate those challenges again, but also possibly foresee when the next one is going to come. I think whenever we talk to a business owner, they'll always tell you that they just had the best year yet. Everything's going well. Next year is going to be even better. And if they've got evidence to back that up, like maybe they've won a contract, maybe they've got like a really big pipeline of contracts that they're confident in landing, then that's great. But I think that you can also be talked into a sort of false sense of everything's going swimmingly, it's only getting better. And for that, they might justify why the company should have a higher value than maybe what the current financial statistics might suggest it's worth. So one thing you could do to sort of protect yourself in that is to try and introduce an earn-out structure. So if they're going to tell you they're going to have the best year yet because they're going to land these three new clients, which is going to double the profits in the business, well, great. If they deliver those things, we'll pay them a percentage of that, so they get their higher value and we get the growth in the business. But paying for all of that's possible, increase in revenue or profits, without any sort of mechanism to claw back is, always going to set those sort of unrealistic growth expectations. So I think that's really, really important, and I think it's really important to have a sort of conservative approach when you're looking at growth forecasts.
Mm. So why is it so many people seem to underestimate the importance of a company culture in M&A?
I think culture is very important because every business is different. If it's a startup, it's probably gone through a growth period. If the owners owned it for a long time and created a sort of consistently profitable business, it possibly could have stagnated a little bit. Making sure that your workforce is happy and motivated is half the battle, really, because if you've got a happy, motivated workforce, then they're going to do a good job at looking after customers and delivering for those customers, and ultimately that all translates into making money. But if you've got a poor culture, you could have issues with employee retention, recruitment could be more difficult, productivity could be an issue. I think that all of those things are really important to look at in the sort of due diligence phase.
I think one thing that I find interesting from talking to people is that there are a lot of people out there trying to find their first acquisition, and maybe they haven't had any sort of guidance within it, and they're just learning trial and error. And I think when they find their way to yourself, is they can be really competent in so many different ways. And even like when you start talking about like accountancy related topics, it's like they can really understand balance sheets and everything, but you sort of break down where are they failing, and a lot of it can be purely really poor communication. And I think it's overlooked really as an insight of how it actually breaks down so many deals. And it's one thing I wanted to talk about, because I think when you're dealing with a business owner, how you come across to that person, it's imperatively important that you come across in the right way. You have to come across in a caring nature, but you also have to look like you know what you're talking about, of course. But what can be done to improve that? Because I think poor communication probably prevents most deals getting off even the starting line.
Yeah, so I think communication is key, not just in M&A, but pretty much in every walk of life. Whenever there's conflict or a problem, most of the time I think you can always trace it back to there was some sort of breakdown in communication, a miscommunication, not enough communication, and I guess the way that deals break down here is when the communication between the buyer and the seller and other key stakeholders isn't there. It can create that confusion, and I think it's really important that there's transparency and clear expectations are set throughout the process, because that then gives practical steps for everybody to be kept informed and aligned from negotiation through to integration. So I think, yeah, communication is probably one of the most important skills and things to have in the process. And that's probably where you can point to most failures, when a deal doesn't happen or it goes wrong, or the business doesn't get integrated as well as you had hoped. A lot of that will really, go back to communication.
So I think a lot of messing up buying a company also happens after you've bought the company, and maybe you start to learn some of those mistakes quite quickly when you have the keys and you go to the business for the first time and you understand what it is that you have in front of you. Why is it that sort of, I mean, to break it down into different sections here, but ignoring the customers, the company's customer base can be a big mistake, but also poor financing decisions that lead to the challenges post-acquisition as well?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, customers are, a business is nothing without its customers. So, understanding the customer loyalty, its demographics, the buying behavior is all critical to enable you to assess, A, is the business something that you want to buy? And then when you actually acquire it, what's that customer likely to do based on past behavior? Are they going to continue buying from you? Is there a risk that they're going to go somewhere else? Is it that there's going to be pressure on margins? Is the risk of losing customers post-acquisition if there's going to be any sort of disruption to the service or product quality, and really getting into the detail and understanding that customer retention is going to be quite crucial. And yeah, poor financing decisions can also lead to challenges post acquisition, because if you get into a position where you're over leveraging yourself or you're choosing finance that strains the cash flow, that then creates a short-term thinking, because all you're thinking about is how do you meet payroll, how do you make the next debt payment, how do you trade within your debt covenants that the lenders imposed on you, and you have to make sometimes short-term decisions to deal with all of those things, which aren't necessarily always in the best interest for the long-term growth of the company. So we're always looking at is there a different way of doing this? Can we be more creative? Can we reduce the upfront risk so that we can protect cash flow? And yeah, really making sure that we choose the right financial structure that aligns with the long-term goals rather than the short-term things.
Do you think many people really properly assess those risks?
I think most people that are new to M&A or haven't got much experience of M&A, yes, absolutely. I think people that are more seasoned and done deals lots of the time, probably they've had at least one deal where they got into that situation of being over leveraged, and maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe they did their due diligence and maybe something random happened, like a global pandemic that nobody saw coming, that could have just decimated a business and was completely unforeseen. But we always have to be, expect the unexpected and try and build in some margin so that if things do go wrong, that you're not putting yourself in that position. A really straightforward example would be not to use more than 50% of the available cash flow in a business to service any debt or seller payments, which basically means that if you take over and then all of a sudden profits halve because you lost a key customer, something went wrong, whatever, something unforeseen happened, you've still got half of what you thought was going to be there, which is just about enough to deal with those things. And that really just sort of hedges that risk.
So I know yourself, sort of experience has taught you really that it's very important to have a strong sort of post-acquisition plan and what that actually looks like. And I think more inexperienced people within this space, they probably overlook the importance of actually having that. I think it'd be interesting to hear firstly, what that is and how it should be built in and why it should be built in.
Yeah, so I think what I don't want this to come across in the wrong way, but actually finding and doing a deal is fairly easy. Yeah, you've got to do your outreach to find the deal, you've got to have the conversations, you've got to convince the business owner, you've got to negotiate with them, you've got to analyze the financials, you've got to present a financial proposal that's affordable and viable and meets everybody's expectations, and then obviously you've got your due diligence process to ratify all of that, the legals to protect yourself, and then the deal gets done. It's straightforward. It's a long process. It takes time. It takes perseverance, etc. But it's fairly straightforward to do deals. The hard work starts when you actually own the company. And it's really important to have an acquisition plan, an integration plan, because if you don't have one and you're just sort of going to go along with it, you buy the company and then you just sort of figure it out as you go, chances are things aren't going to work out. So, we, for example, have a sort of checklist of, what needs to be done on day one, within 7 days, within 30 days, within 90 days. And some of it can be just, really basic stuff like, informing key stakeholders or getting on the bank mandate for the company, and all those sorts of things. But some of it might be then more strategic about, what's the business plan? What does the forecast look like? And whilst we will have done all of those things, when you've owned a business for 90 days, you'll have a much clearer idea of that particular business, and that can then hone your plan. So yeah, it's really just important to have a step-by-step plan. And I would start, before you even build that plan, I'd actually start with the why. Why are you buying this business? What are you wanting to do with it? Why are you wanting to do those things with it? And then you can come up with a plan and work back from there. And if you're working with somebody like me, our goal is to make several acquisitions in an industry, build a larger group, and then we want to sell. So we want to understand, how big can we make it? Who's going to buy us when we get to that size, and how are we going to do all of those things, and what types of acquisitions are we going to make, and how are we going to grow the how are we going to grow the business organically? Is it improved sales? Is it improved marketing? Is it some cross-selling opportunity across the acquisitions? So yeah, figuring all of that out is really important, and without it, you're basically destined for it to not work out, and the business will decimate and underperform, and struggle.
So do you find there are, especially with more inexperienced people within the space, quite a lot of people that maybe they're so excited that they actually have a deal that's looking like it's going to happen, and it does happen, but then maybe they fail to negotiate favorable terms that will impact it longer term?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of examples out there of really large, very public deals that have gone wrong. Where maybe a big private equity firm has bought them, loaded it with debt, can't service that debt, then the business has gone bust in a relatively short period of time. So yeah, making sure that you've got deals that, of course, any deal's got to be win-win. It's got to meet the owner's expectations. It's got to be serviceable. It's got to fit with your criteria. And fit within your risk profile. And if any of those things aren't aligned, then either the deal doesn't get done, or worse, the deal does get done, but then you're in a situation where you've got this unfavorable deal that is going to put the business under pressure. And I can't emphasize enough that, having been in that situation, it's a very stressful environment to work in, and you have to make short-term decisions for the survival of the business, which isn't necessarily always in the best interests of the long term. There's nothing worse than having to lay staff off because you want to be doing the opposite. You want to be hiring more people because you're going on a growth journey, but sometimes you have to do those things because of situations you've inherited, or deal terms that you've put in place that obviously have turned out not to be viable in the way the business is trading, or something unexpected happens that causes you to have to make those decisions. So, I would far rather be spending my time talking about growing the business, hiring more staff, making it bigger, better, than having to figure out how I'm going to make payroll next Friday because I haven't got enough cash flow coming in, and I need to lay off a load of workers because otherwise we're not going to be able to, survive. I know which scenario I would rather be part of.
I mean, what are the risks then, building and having a strong team in place before acquisition, so going through the acquisition process, but then also having a strong team, which is a completely different team when you have acquired a business. Could you talk about that, the importance of it, because we can't all be experts in everything, and just having the time to do it is quite key. But also, what can people do if they are maybe slightly more inexperienced and don't have that support around them? It's not as easy as saying, right, let me go and find a HR director and employ that person, but oh gosh, now I've got to find 80 grand a year.
Yeah, so I would say, firstly, don't bother going on any sort of M&A journey until you've got your team that you need to execute your plan. So, one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is that they go and buy the business, and then they hire the team of experts that they need to do the work. I would do it completely in reverse, because these are people that you want to trust, are going to work with you long term. You don't want to just be parachuting them into a deal as and when it happens. You want them as part of the planning phase, because the work that they're gonna do will be based off some of the due diligence information we'll find out as we're going through that process. They'll have a heads up on maybe areas of concern, risks, etc. They'll help us manage through, any red flags or complexities within the deal. So I would certainly say having that team on board. Obviously, you've got to figure out, how you do that. And if you haven't got any deals and no cash flow whatsoever, and you've got to find these people, you don't have to necessarily just pay them cash. You could offer them a percentage of the deal for them, in return for them doing the work. So I would strongly recommend, building the team before going in, because the journey, the integration, the subsequent acquisitions that you want to make will be so much more straightforward going in with that level of expertise and knowledge and understanding, and having a heads up of any potential issues that might crop up as we go, and having a sort of contingency plan that if they turn into a reality, we know exactly what we're going to do to manage them, is just, for me, so crucial. So I certainly wouldn't bother making any acquisitions until I've got that expertise. And this doesn't have to be some, massive full-blown team. I would say that the core ones really are legal. Well, you could potentially get that in the lawyer you're going to work with to do the transaction. Financial, so understanding the financials and the forecasting and the model and the budgets and the due diligence on all of that side of things, I think is quite key. That could be a part-time sort of semi-retired, very experienced FD that's willing to work on a sort of contingent or I remember the first person I ever dealt with when I did one of my first ever deals. Now we have a team of people, obviously, on the payroll, but the first person was an ex accountant that had worked on the deal team for one of the big four accounting firms, who then worked on a sort of self-employed contractor basis in his sort of semi-retirement. And he would sort of charge us $3.5 to $5 grand a deal, contingent on success, and we'd pay him a small day rate thereafter, and then he would have a percentage of the deal. That's just one example. And then the operational side, well, I think if you're buying your first business, you probably want to buy one that comes with a capable management team. So you've probably already got your operational team, they just need some guidance. So I would say that it's absolutely crucial to have that in place before even contemplating going out and doing an acquisition.
Okay, so to bring this conversation to a close today, if there was one sort of takeaway that you would advise for people to avoid making some of these common mistakes and to build a solid foundation in M&A, what would you really highlight to people?
I would say go in with your eyes wide open. So, really that's about due diligence and making sure that you understand the business, how it operates, and, trying to flush out any of the potential risks and building then into the legals, any protections that you need. And obviously, if any of those issues are so severe that could put you off, walk away. Absolutely walk away. I know you've only asked me for one, but I'm going to give you a few. I think obviously having that strategic plan is another important one. What's the point of this? How are we going to do it? What are we building? Why are we building it? How are we going to do it? Making sure that you've got the right team of experts that can go in on day one, that are on your team before you even start the due diligence process, so they can be involved from the get-go. And I can't emphasize the value of sort of networking and mentorship and surrounding yourself with people that have done this before, really to further your own learning and education. I think they're really quite crucial factors.
Okay, perfect. Well, as always, very insightful. Next conversation to have is sort of leading on from this, really, and it's to work from a more inexperienced side of things. So it's the beginner's guide to M&A and how people can maybe fast track a little bit to getting their first acquisition. So I think for a lot of people, it's trial and error. It can take years before you finally get that first acquisition, and that's if you've not given up in the process of doing it. So we wanted to sort of guide people how they can do that in a much quicker time frame. So as always, lovely speaking to you, and we'll catch you all in the next episode.
Can I ask you a favor? If you like this content, then please do subscribe to the channel to receive more content like this as we upload it. It helps our channel and shares the message with like-minded deal makers. It also helps me to connect with our audience and bring you more content that you can watch.